It's been happening for about 2 weeks now, and conveniently 2 weeks ago, I spoke its name out loud. My name is Chloe, and I live in Cassat, South Carolina. It's a small town in Kershaw County. I live off of a dirt road that turns through deep woods, and at nighttime it's always pitch black, but very lively. However, ever since I spoke its name and outwardly doubted its existence in my area of the state, it's been the total opposite. The woods are unnervingly silent, the deer never come out anymore, and there's a persistent foul odor. It smells like death, a gut shot on a deer decomposing corpses. I can't really describe it. The smell only comes around at night, about 2 hours after sunset, and it's always gone in the morning. The other day I was babysitting some kids who love to explore, and that's why we get along, because I also love to do it. Though it came to a screeching halt. At 5 p.m. we walked down my dirt road, and after a bit the woods became silent again. I felt very uneasy. The feeling grew more intense when the oldest boy pointed at these giant paw prints. They were bigger than my own hand, and for reference, I'm a 5'6" female with average size hands. And now every time I walk outside at night, or let my dogs out to do what they need to do, I feel watched, and the smell is awful. My dogs won't go far, and they've been acting strange. Even my indoor cats are going nuts. I'm worried that something is actually out there in my woods, and I'm even more worried that something will happen to my mother when she's out there. She's been noticing things too. She's a superstitious woman, and won't take my warnings and concerns seriously. I'm extremely sorry if my sentences are erratic, and don't make sense when put together. I'm nervous and just trying to get all of the facts and things I've noticed out to people who might believe me or help me. I have no one to go to that won't make me feel stupid. I know I'm not crazy. I need help or figuring out what's going on and how to stop it. I need to clarify that while religious, I'm not particularly superstitious, and despite looking at and exploring many abandoned locations, the sites of horrific tragedies like old battlegrounds and massacres, I never experienced or truly believed in anything paranormal or unexplainable. This story is the one and only experience I have that has made me even consider the possibility of otherworldly forces or things I can't rationally explain. And if I hadn't experienced this personally, I would assumed with a great deal of certainty that it's complete nonsense. So for some context of the area I was in, my great-uncle owns a lot of land in northern Canada. Some of this was pasture that he uses for cattle, but half of one of the largest properties is fenced off, and the cows can't go there. In the sectioned-off lactose-free zone, the entire place is densely packed with foliage. When I hunt, I almost only use game trails and small clearings because a lot of the brush is too thick to get through with a machete. The ground itself is blotted with some small steep hills towards the entrance of the property. There is one main dirt road that goes from a Texas gate at the entrance all the way back to the farthest side of the property. Coming off the road in the hilly area, we have a camp. The camp consists of a camperized ATCO trailer, in front of the entrance gated with barbed wire because sometimes my uncle will move his cattle to different fenced-off areas of the land. With my mother's pool behind the trailer, that we can't pull anymore, sitting perpendicular to the ATCO, and a tiny dingy 70s-ish 14-foot pull behind that a family member gave me, so I could have privacy at camp and not have to sleep with my mom. Needless to say, we spend a lot of time in the woods, and both my mom's and my door were facing the direction of the ATCO, meaning I had a pseudo alleyway between my door and my mom's wall, and finally in front of the ATCO trailer. We have a fire pit, and close next to it, in front of my mom's place, there is a table for food prep. Sorry for the lengthy explanation, but I feel like in order for the sequence of events to make sense, you'll need to understand where I was in the space, and maybe locations will make my reference points more clear for explaining later. We've always had lots of wildlife, like big cats and bears that could harm people. I actually had to put down a bear that came into our camp and was far too comfortable with people, and not too long after. So since I was young, I learned to recognize the sounds and sights around me, and while cautious, I'm rarely afraid of anything out there, especially given that I'm usually armed when I'm not with multiple people. The summer before last, we had a remarkably calm experience. There were hardly any critters we had to deal with, and it seemed the bears and pests were leaving us. It was peaceful, it being summer. I filled the days with woodworking, fishing trips, and the occasional hike, looking for berries and setting traps up for rabbits and other small game that could be prepared quickly over the fire with my family, but mostly came up unlucky. Regardless of the seeming lack of disturbances, we always were careful at night, making sure to have a bright light and keep a lookout for anything. After the first week, we began hearing noises around the camp, very late at night, that would drive the dog insane all night to the point we just had to keep her inside, but never saw anything. It almost felt like whatever it was probing and checking out our camp nightly, but always staying far enough away and hidden enough that we could never see it with our spotlights. And then one night, just like any other, bar the eerie quietness that usually came around that time, I left my mother's camper a couple hours after the daylight had disappeared with a lantern-style LED light, and as a rarity, I didn't have anything to defend myself, so I was a little bit more cautious and observant than usual, given I felt more vulnerable. As I walked from the exit of my mom's camper, I looked around for a minute, scanning the tree line, and then began the loop around to my door. I panned as I walked from right to left, from the entrance to the fire pit, and then to the table. It was there, just behind the table, not 20 feet away, that I saw a naked, extremely pale, almost gray, lanky, humanoid figure standing still and directly facing me. As it caught my gaze, I felt my heart drop and immediately went cold. I probably only stared for 3 seconds at most, but it felt like several minutes. As my brain processed what I was seeing, it stood somewhere between 6.5 to 7.5 feet tall, with low slumped shoulders, and had a frail, thin body that reminded me of photos from the Holocaust, but with disproportionately long limbs. I couldn't see the legs fully because of the table, but what I could see looked like sinew and skin stretched over the leanest and thinnest body I've ever seen. I know I might be sounding like a dramatic, but I couldn't describe the primal fear and shock that came over me. It was like a combination of that feeling you get being threatened at gunpoint and hearing something stalk you in the woods, but ramped up to the point where I could barely think. I couldn't make out many details of the face, but the light cast small shadows on the face that made it look like it had shallow features similar to a nose, lips, and eye sockets that were smoothed down. I ran like my life depended on it. The last few feet to my door. Once inside, I grabbed the shotgun, stuffed several shells in my pocket, loaded the gun, and aimed at the door. I sat in silence with the hammer pulled back, waiting for the doorknob to turn or the frosted glass to break. I sat and wailed for hours into the early morning, expecting to see or hear something, but I never did. Not even any foliage moving or items moving. Eventually, around 4 a.m., I lowered my guard, propped the shotgun next to my bed, and hesitantly went to sleep. When I woke up, hardly believing in what I had seen the night before, I was around the area to see if there were any shapes or items that I could have mistaken and warped in my mind into this creature I saw. But the only thing in that area was a table with some pots and pans on it that were blackened from the fire. I'm still not quite sure what to make of it, but I do have some ideas from what I witnessed, given the fact that I believe it was stalking us and stalking out our camp for several nights, along with positioning itself between me and my mother's camper. Directly in front of the path that I took every night leads me to believe that it had some level of intelligence comparable to a low person laying a trap or setting something up. As I mentioned, I looked around after exiting my mother's camper and never heard anything, which tells me that either it was waiting there watching, or it was so incredibly quiet that I never heard it move, even a leaf, which wouldn't line up with us hearing the disturbances from the previous nights. It also left as quickly as it appeared, which leaves three options. Either it went out of its way to use the same road entering the camp that a person would for convenience, it silently crept out through the game trails, or it didn't wave until after I had lowered my guard and my adrenaline died down. I'm honestly not sure which option is more likely or more off-putting. I'm not really sure what I saw, but I know it wasn't human. The photos and drawings of these crawlers reminded me a great deal of it, so I thought I'd share. Maybe one of you could enlighten me on what I could have seen, or its intent, or provide an explanation to what its behavior is. I used to love the woods. I loved the quiet, peace, and tranquility of the forest, the sort of haven that gave me a minor distraction from the outside world. I would go exploring a lot when I was a kid and eat up any sort of nature documentary I could get my hands on. And that was until I moved into my most recent house. Now I stay far away from those woods. I often go on my porch at night and just stare at the tree line as my eyes gaze into the impenetrable darkness. I know there's something there, just out of sight, gazing back at me. My property dates back to the 1800s, and it is a true 1800s looking property. The original house I used to live in here was something out of an old-timey scary movie. The same could be said with the barn on my property. Either way, everything here was built by the original owners, way back when making the buildings and the property is very, very old. And I partly think this relates to the problems I've had here. I usually don't tell these stories, but after looking at this subreddit, I feel like maybe someone will understand. I'll talk about the main problem, which is the woods. And this will be long, so I apologize. These encounters took place over the course of 10 years. I was sitting down by the river behind my house with my grandfather one afternoon. We were fishing and having a good time. I was thrilled with spending time with my grandfather, and fishing at the time was our favorite activity. I remarked to him about a Bigfoot hunting show I was watching on TV, and found out he watched the same show. A big part of the Bigfoot show was knocking on trees with wood to make a big sound. The rumor is Bigfoot will knock back to communicate with you. I always had a strange feeling about those woods. Something just wasn't right about them. There were two sides connected by a bridge. One side was the one my grandfather and I were on. The side is warm, and nice birds sing and crickets do their thing. But on the other side of the river, once you cross that bridge, it's dead. No noise, no sun, cold, no birds, no crickets, no animals, and all the plants there are dead. You get a chill running down your spine and instantly feel like you just shouldn't be there. Yeah, I always had a weird vibe about it, so joking around with my grandfather, I took a block of wood and banged it against the nearest tree. We laughed until we heard a bang back come from the woods. My grandfather stopped dead in his tracks and gazed deep into the woods. I banged twice. It banged twice back. I banged 3 times. It banged 3 times back. I banged once. It banged once back. Until finally the banging just stopped. My grandfather brushed it off, but something about it didn't settle right with me. I made up my mind at that moment to find out what made that noise, a decision I would come to regret later. Fast forward a couple of months. I was in the very same woods with a friend and her dad, only on the other side of them as we walked. I told her the story about the knocks, and kids being kids, we decided to name the monster in the woods, and I'm not very proud to admit we settled on Jerry. When we got to the heart of the woods, we found 3 broken down cars down there like old cars from the 60s. They're arranged in the shape of a triangle, separated by a couple of yards between them. One on top of a hill, the other is in a clearing, and the last one in the middle of some brush. No roads lead into these woods, only rickety old bridges that are half rotten. So I don't even know why they are there. We all walk up to the cars and are looking at them. I never go into the woods without a walking stick. Being a young boy, I take the stick and give the car a good hit. My friend laughs, but as soon as I hit that car, all hell broke loose. I'm not talking about anger screaming. I'm talking about the types of screaming someone does when they're about to die. It sounded like a woman was getting butchered right in front of us, and it didn't stop. It kept getting louder and louder, and was all around us. My friend and I freaked out. I went to ask her dad what he thought. When I looked up at him, I saw complete and utter fear. And this guy grew up in the heart of Mass. He doesn't scare easily. Seeing him like that, his face completely pale, just staring into the brush, all he said was, "Let's go." And as we were walking out, the screaming continued. As we left the area, it kept screaming louder and louder until we crossed the bridge. As soon as our bodies broke the threshold of the bridge, the screams completely stopped. After that encounter, the same friend made it our mission to find Jerry and find out exactly what it was. In hindsight, this was very stupid, but I was just a dumb kid, and I didn't know it would lead to everything it did. We were talking about my first encounter and about the knocking. She got the idea to try and use the knocks to communicate. It seemingly wasn't a bad idea, and I figured it couldn't hurt to try. I knew something was out there, and I just wanted answers. "Knock once if you don't want us to go into the woods." I yelled across the river. We waited about 15 seconds until there was a knock. Only this wasn't like the first one. This knock sounded like it came from metal on metal, very similar to the sound the car in the woods made when I hit it with a stick. "Knock twice if you want us to stay on this side of the bridge." Again, 2 knocks, one right after the other, sounding like it was beating on those old cars. I was stunned by the first set of knocks, sure. That could have been someone messing with me. But the second pair of knocks had the same event happening twice. Only this time, it was using the knocks to communicate with us. I asked it again to knock if it didn't want us out there, and it knocked as soon as I asked the question. This taught me 3 things. 1, it did not want us out there poking around, but what could it be hiding? 2, it's the cars. Something about those cars, when I hit it, those screams came for us, and now it was using them to communicate. Finally, 3, whatever it is, it's smart and it can communicate. And this freaked me out because to answer questions shows intelligence and understanding. It has its own set of wants and desires it can communicate, and it's strong enough to bang on a metal car, meaning it can interact with the physical world. And this was the last hunt my friend joined me on. We were walking down to the river, spinning our thoughts and theories about Jerry. We knew it could communicate. We knew it didn't want us in the woods. We knew it could interact with physical objects, and lastly, we knew there was something about those cars. We got down into the clearing the river is on, and we were about to start walking into the woods when we heard, "Carly." We heard her mother's voice call her name, and didn't think anything of it. We figured she wanted her to come out of the woods. So we left the river and walked back up to my house, where we found her mom. Sitting in her car, literal heavy death metal music blasting. She knocked on her mom's window, and her mom opened it. "Hey, did you call my name earlier?" "No, I've been sitting here listening to music." My heart sank when we heard her name. It wasn't just me that heard it. She heard it too. We both looked at each other and instantly thought the same thing. And that thing changed its voice to sound like her mom, and it knew her name. We never ended up going into the woods that day, and I often wonder if it called her name to distract us. So we never got to go out and look for it. Either way, that's the last time she helped me search for it. I got one of my other friends to help me search for Jerry. He agreed to help because my river is a popular fishing spot in town. I told him about the strange happenings in the woods, and while he and another friend were fishing down there, they walked into the woods and tore a steering wheel out of the old cars, and then proceeded to be chased out of the woods by the same screams I was. Either way, he agreed to help me, and we went out there about 8 miles, and each time, the feeling in those woods got more and more hostile. Looking back, I can see why I knew it didn't want me there, but I kept walking deep into the dragon's den expecting not to get burned. When in there, it got to the point where if we were walking and then stopped suddenly, we could hear the crunch of twigs and leaves being smashed under heavy footsteps, tree branches snapping as something walked through them. It was easy to tell something was following us the whole time, watching us from afar, keeping track of our movements. We felt like animals being stalked from afar. One day, I was sitting in a tree surveying the land, and that's when I saw an arm just sitting on a tree. The arm was wrapped around the tree like it was hugging it. Its skin was black and gray, like the bark of the trunk. I only saw it because it happened to pick up its arm and move it behind the tree. During another investigation, we were in the woods one day doing an investigation when suddenly, I felt a cold chill go up my spine. I felt it behind me. I don't know how, but I did. "Jimmy, take a picture behind me right now." He snapped the photo without question, and that's when we saw it. Standing behind me was a small figure, probably about 5 feet tall, in completely black robes, a hood covering its head with no face. I was stunned. I couldn't believe it. There in the photo was a hooded shadow figure standing behind me. This only piqued my curiosity. Looking back, I was so stupid. I had this thing telling me not to go in the woods, but yet I would go in the woods. And this is why people die in horror movies. What did Jerry look like? While I did get that picture, I don't think that was its true form. Or at least that wasn't the only one out there. This is the part I completely and utterly hate and wish had never happened. On one of our investigations, something went wrong. The footsteps were too close, and things were moving in and out of the tree line some. And Jimmy booked it out of the woods, fighting to get to the bridge because as soon as we crossed that bridge, the activity instantly died, and whatever was out there either couldn't cross or didn't want to. We're running through the trees, feeling dreadful like something was coming, and I wish I'd never turned my head to look to my right. I heard something over there, and I don't know why, but I decided to look. Its shape was human, but it had no features. It was broad daylight, yet its skin was completely black like a shadow. Its arms were super long, and it was so skinny, it almost looked like a stick figure. I could make out its head, arm, torso, which was human in shape, but then its legs were bent backward like a dog or a wolf. It moved on all fours so fast, quicker than anything I've ever seen in my life. I'm a horse farmer. I've seen horses run full speed, and this thing made me look slow. I just happened to perfectly turn my head at the right moment. I locked eyes with it in that split second. Well, it didn't have any eyes, but I could feel it look at me, and at that moment I knew I saw something I was never supposed to. It was running beside me, but I still was never meant to see that. It ran by a tree and disappeared into thin air. I've never run so fast in my life. I was terrified. What was it? That thing wasn't some small little thing in a hood. This was some sort of animal-human mix or something. It was awful. And one of the last encounters I had with Jerry, I was walking down to the river. All of a sudden, the wind picked up out of nowhere. The trees started bending and dancing in the wind, and then a laugh cut through the woods. An evil laugh. A menacing laugh, followed by a goat belting louder than anything I've ever heard. And that was the last time I went down there. It was the first time something had happened on my side of the bridge, the safe side. Jerry always stayed on his side and never came over to mine. Well, he changed that, and I threw in the towel. I was never going out there again. I had eyewitnesses. I had evidence. I had locked eyes with the thing. Now it was coming over to my side of the river, invading my home like I invaded it. I was done, and I told him that. I went to the river one last time. The wind picked up again instantly, trees whipping all around the woods, groaning all around me. And I apologized for everything, for going out there and disturbing its home. After hitting the car, too, actually tried to hunt it. I apologized and told the thing I never wanted to see or hear from it ever again. As soon as I said those words, the wind died. The trees stilled and the woods made noise again. I agreed to never go into his woods as long as he never crosses the bridge again. If he stayed on his side, I agreed to stay on mine. It had been a couple of months since my deal had been struck, and the activity in the woods slowed to zero. There was nothing if you went down there. It was still creepy, but nothing at all like before. I had wondered if my otherworldly friend had gone to wherever he came from until, however, one of my friends slept over. I told him about my story with Jerry, and he didn't believe me. He ran outside onto the porch, and before I could stop him, yelled into the woods, "I'm not scared of you, you pussy." I asked him to stop, but he yelled it again and said, "I'm not scared of you. I got God on my side." He was cut off by the sound of metal crunching down on metal. His face turned white and fear poured into his eyes. He had yelled at Jerry and called him out, and Jerry responded with one of his signature knocks. My friend ran back into the house, freaking out really bad, asking me, "What was that? What is out there?" So we sat down in my room, and he let me tell him more. It was then we both heard my doorknob turned, and with a pop, my door opened slowly, and slowly inching its way until it was completely open. And the whole time, my friend and I watched it, holding our breath as fear consumed us. He was even more freaked out than before, and left the next day telling his family what had happened as he got into the car. Jerry had never left like I thought he might have. He simply was waiting and listening, until he had to make himself known again. After my run-in with Jerry, and even more spirits on my property, my mom was sitting down with an old-timer of the town we live in. They were talking about ghosts, and she told her my story. The old-timer revealed, when she was a young girl, a bunch of town officials got into trouble because it was discovered they were all part of a satanic cult. Even the sheriff was a part of it. The rumor around town is that they even did rituals and sacrificed people. Do I think Jerry is the byproduct of that? I don't know. Do I think that hooded figure is connected? I don't know. I've been trying to figure out for years what happened out there, and most importantly, what that thing I saw was. If you have any ideas, feel free to let me know. After the activity with Jerry died down, I still encountered many spirits on my property, yet I know nothing. The only thing I do know is those woods are his, and I'm never going out there again. It's been about 3 years now since Jerry and I have had run-ins. Since, I still get curious and wonder if he's still out there. But when I look into the woods and feel those eyes staring back, I know he's still there.
Thank you for watching, and if you enjoyed this video, please give a like, leave a comment, and subscribe. Perhaps click the bell for notifications, and remember, hell is empty, and the devils are here.